In response to the DPRK's latest nuclear test, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that sanctions and dialogue should advance together to solve the Korean Peninsula puzzle. How is China's approach to the problem evolving? President Xi spoke to President Trump via telephone to exchange views on the Korean situation. The US will deliver a draft proposing to cut the DPRK's oil supply to the UN on September 11th. What can we expect from the dialogue from China and the US, and how would stopping the supply of oil affect the DPRK? The final elements of the THAAD system have been deployed in South Korea despite marches and protests against it. Why are so many ROK citizens against THAAD? Will THAAD provide security or provoke further harm? According to Japanese media, Prime Minister Abe is looking at plans for a possible mass evacuation of Japanese citizens in the ROK. Could the plan work, and what will be its effect on South Korea?
Following the DPRK's sixth nuclear, which occurred last weekend, China has begun considering further sanctions on its troublesome neighbor, while the US talks tough and contemplates its options. Additionally, the ROK, Japan and Russia have all reacted to the further provocation, but tensions continue to rise and no viable solution is yet apparent. To discuss the situation on the Korean Peninsula and where it is headed, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Rick Dunham, a visiting scholar at Tsinghua University. We shall also speak to Professor Junho Kim from Dankook University in Seoul and Professor Takasato Watanabe from Dorchester University via satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to our discussion here. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said explicitly and openly that this time around China would love to see a combination of both sanctions and dialogue to try to persuade the DPRK to give up the nuclear ambition. Now, this is apparently a shift from our previous position to only focus on dialogue and negotiations. What do you think it should be the motivation that prompted China to change our previous policy?
But from my observation, there haven't been a substantive changes or shifts between the previous diplomatic wording and now the direct wording, frank wording. For example, previously, Wang Yi said North Korea has to take necessary consequences by their nuclear, provocative nuclear and missile tests. The so-called necessary consequences indirectly means the pressures and the sanctions. And this time, Wang Yi actually said the same meaning of the words, but with more direct way. So basically, China's way of thinking to deal with provocative challenges made by the nuclear missile of North Korea remain unchanged. Say, mainly focus on, as you said, mainly focusing on the efforts for dialogues and negotiations, plus necessary sanctions pressures. But from the diplomatic wording to the frank wording really reflects some shifting positions. Say China is getting tougher and tougher measures on North Korea, with North Korea's more and more provocative practices of nuclear and missile.
Rick, do you see the same way that China is losing its patience?
I think so. I think there are two differences that we've seen. One is this last nuclear test is the largest ever, and it was clearly an affront to the United Nations, to China, to the United States, to Russia, and all the other nations involved who had been trying to figure out a way out. Secondly, you have an issue of really health along the North Korean-Chinese border with all of the radiation that's going there, with the potential cost to China of dealing with either a health problem or refugees, even questions of relocation of people near the border. And I think that China is also trying to head off military action or calm down Donald Trump. And so Xi Jinping is trying to figure out a way to thread the needle, to get tough without causing complete disruption in North Korea.
Thank you so much. Let me cross over to Professor Kim. Hello, Professor Kim.
Yeah. Hello, Yang Yi.
I'm afraid public opinions here deliver a mixed feeling in China. On the one hand, majority of the Chinese could understand very well the tough rhetoric from Foreign Minister Wang Yi saying we're going to consider a combination of both sanctions as well as negotiations. On the other hand, we are clearly aware of the deployment of yet another battery of THAAD. You know what's going on. That's a pretty nasty situation between the ROK and China. So as a result, don't you think the diplomatic rhetoric from the Chinese Foreign Ministry has been somehow compromised due to your single-handed deployment of THAAD, which is a missile shield program that might be viewed by the Chinese as a detrimental to an equilibrium of strategic deterrence on our side, and indeed in the broad region of Northeast Asia?
Okay, thanks very much. The first problem is that the North Korea nuclear weapons developing and escalating, the tensions problem nowadays is very serious around all Korean Peninsula countries concerned about that. First, the problem is concerned with South Korea and North Korea. And the other problem is one of the Korean Peninsula problem. So the problem more deeply concerned with China. So China Prime Minister, foreign minister said about the problem, dialogue and sanctions come going together, because the problem is that cannot be solved by only sanctions. Looks like Putin said just yesterday he perhaps cannot degree about the sanctions in UN, because the problem is that China has one of the border country near the North Korea, the place that tested nuclear bombs. So the more seriously concerned country is perhaps we can say China. So the problem, we know the China nuclear weapon, they have their old history how to develop the nuclear weapon and missiles. But he worried about that North Korea, there is their domestic situations. Perhaps their main aim is wanted to negotiate with United States. So this time we should going together with sanctions and dialogue. And the other side in Korea, we are very concerned about the problem of North Korea. But we have very different situations, because we have also good relationships with United States, and also have now good economic and cooperating relationships with China.
Yes,
So
I know. We know that there is a very, very strong relationship, which is, of course, a treaty alliance between the between ROK and the United States. However, we have also noticed that President Moon Jae-in doesn't see eye to eye with his American counterpart on the use of force, because the United States says over and over that the strategic patience is over. Let me come back to talk to Mr. Yang and Rick. Do you think there is a serious divergence in opinion between President Trump and President Moon about military intervention? Because President Moon says we would never ever allow yet another war to take place on the Korean Peninsula, because ROK would be the first to bear the brunt and will suffer the heaviest casualty were such hostilities to break out.
Yes, I do believe the divisions between between President Trump and President Moon is really deep, simply because of the different situations. For South Korea, actually mentioned, if war broke out, a lot of unpredictable suffers will be taken by South Korea rather than by the United States. So basically, President Moon really serious about what he said without allowance. And especially legally speaking, everyone knows the ROK Constitution covers the whole peninsula. Just like a DPRK Constitution covers the whole peninsula either. Legally speaking, without South Korea's ROK's agreement, any military action by U.S. on the land of the peninsula means the striking the territory or sovereignty of ROK.
But I'm afraid currently the Supreme Command is in the hands of the United States. There was some debate, right, a few years ago as to who should take charge of the military use. But now it seems that the United States would still control and command the military presence there.
I think that's pretty clear. What you've seen with the development and deployment of THAAD, the United States clearly was driving that. There was disagreement within South Korea. The United States just pushed it through. And I think that we're seeing a bigger divide in the past several weeks between Donald Trump and the South Korean administration than between Donald Trump and the Chinese government. And it's not just of possible military force, it's the issue of trade. I mean, this is probably the worst time for the United States to say that the country might cancel the free trade agreement with South Korea. I mean, right now is not the time to be driving a wedge into that relationship. It's really a time where you need the United States, South Korea, China, and Japan to try to come together for
Rick, I will get back to you in a few minutes. Let me go to Professor Watanabe for the response in Japan towards the nasty escalation of the tensions in the divided Korean Peninsula. Professor Watanabe, after all, for years, perhaps since the end of the Second World War, the U.S.-Japan Security Pact is said to be the only formidable force that would lay the groundwork, if not serve as the cornerstone for the regional security in Northeast Asia. Therefore, what do you think of the possibility that in case of extreme situations, the United States would first opt for a joint intervention with Japan, putting aside the concerns of South Korea, and would start the use of military means? I mean, would that be one of the most viable options on the table at this defining moment about the future of this volatile region?
Now we see the world is changing so much. The first is the option that Japan and some other countries around here should take is that hegemony of the United States is disappearing. And everything must be solved or can be solved by the cooperation of the three major countries, United States, China, and Russia. So if we look at only the North Korea, this is not correctly understood. So, and also, legally, of course, we have two countries in Korean Peninsula, but actually there are some misunderstanding for both North Korea and South Korea. So some people, like Chinese government or Chinese people, must help the North Koreans' understanding of the world. But to answer to your question, if the United States decide to attack physically on the North Korea, Japan cannot do anything directly, but Japan is helping a lot from behind. But I'm sure that this cannot be happening in the near future because the United States, also China and Russia, all of these major countries, they don't want to have the battles, physical battles, in the Korean Peninsula. So Japan is under the control of the United States. However, United States that go directly into North Korea. So this is my understanding, and also this is analysis of the media experts and the scientists here in Japan. Only the Abe administration, or Abe himself, he is saying that we are brave enough to do anything together with the colleagues of the United States and other peace-loving nations.
Thank you so much. Given
is
the very
fallacy, I
nasty
think.
mistrust between the ROK and Japan over the issue of history and some pockets of territory in Northeast Asia, the United States has put the two allies under its security umbrella, Rick.
That's right.
My point is, why the two allies delivered very different responses in the wake of the ignition of the nuclear bomb this time around? Japan, Prime Minister Abe, has made the policy offer to evacuate massively Japanese nationals from the ROK, and that gave a very clear signal that a major war were to break out. But on the other hand, President Moon Jae-in said very clearly, no, we would have a zero tolerance for any use of force to solve the issue of nuclear tests. So what do you think of the entirely different responses from the two allies?
Well, it gets complicated. I think that one thing that you see is, first, Japan is not in the first line of fire. I mean, it's Seoul that would be wiped out if a war erupts, and not Tokyo. So Japan can be a little bit more militaristic. The second thing is, let's look at Japanese domestic politics. And Prime Minister Abe is a militarist in terms of the overall philosophy, and he wants to change the constitution. This could be another step toward that.
To say nothing of the setbacks in the local elections, the LDP wants to win back the seats, right?
I mean, exactly. I think that Prime Minister Abe, like Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, are very conscious in their foreign policy decisions of domestic politics, and so I think you can't take that out of the equation for the way Prime Minister Abe is acting.
What do you think of the massive evacuation proposal?
Well, I think firstly, such a move is really exaggerate the possible consequences. They are playing a game of Tokyo by Tokyo politician. Even in Abe's mind, the probability of the war remain pretty low, but he pretend to let the public know the probability is pretty high, so it need to have some evacuation. So why he's doing that, I think simply because he want to make use of this crisis as an opportunity for his own political agenda, mainly to escalating the revising of the constitution and rebuild up their military capabilities, especially try to implement the so-called collective security, right to collective security.
Let me go to our South Korean guest speaker for his comments on whether Mr. Kim Jong-un, leader of the DPRK, has been able to take hostage the weakness of the ROK official response, because he knows very well that South Korea will be the first country, if not the only one, that will do whatever it can to prevent the use of military intervention under this extreme circumstance. And therefore, Mr. Kim of the DPRK has been able to conduct either missile tests or nuclear tests over and over, regardless of whatever anger the United States or Japan or even China and Russia could have. What do you think of such extreme situations?
Yeah, the problem we think about the main target of North Korea's strategy is against United States, not against South Korea. Although they already said that they can attack South Korea, but their real the aim for this strategy, after developing their nuclear bomb and missiles, and they have get enough good position to want to negotiate with the United States for getting good benefits. So the problem is that we very worry about that. Sometimes if we cannot join the talking table, negotiation table together, perhaps Korea will be a loser. So we want to...
So Professor Kim, my next question, excuse me for breaking in. Professor Kim, do you foresee endless missile and nuclear tests because of the alleged weakness of your presidency? And Mr. Kim of the DPRK knows this clearly, that ROK would always be the first to blink in the standoff. He knows this very well, and therefore he would continue whatever.
Yeah, I know.
You agree,
because,
right?
We wanted to.
He's
yeah,
been
I
able
agree,
to take
but we
advantage
wanted
of your
to
weakness, quote unquote. And therefore, you have to accept
Yes.
the DPRK as a nuclear armed country, eventually. Will that be the point?
Oh, but our point is some different. We don't want to North Korea also have a nuclear weapon. So we want to give big sanctions to North Korea and want to they come out and negotiate with our country.
But I'm afraid your therapy, or policy approach would either be utopian or be viewed as pretty weak. What do you think of our concerns?
Yeah, we know we have a very point nowadays, but today our government also said about that. We cannot make any announcement about employment start and against North Korea problem because we have surrounded by so many countries, China, Russia, North Korea, and United States. So our thinking, if announced to publics, we have big problems because there is also a different problem in domestic politics. So they said we wanted to solve the North Korea nuclear weapon program, but it cannot solve by ourselves. We should keep the alliance with the United States and also want to good relationships and working together with China. But we cannot say very detailed because the problem, but case by case, we can say to the United States and also say to China and some things forward to North Korea.
Thank you so much,
very hard
Mr. Yang.
times in Korea.
Mr. Yang, it seems more and more Chinese start to show their serious concerns about the devastating consequences of whatever nuclear fallout, because some of the sites of the nuclear facilities in the DPRK are so close to the 3 northern provinces of China. The level of radiation is said to be rising, according to some of the surveys by our scientists. So what do you think of the Chinese concerns? This time around, we were one step short of saying we would cut off completely our oil supply to the DPRK. And according to Western media reports, China is 80%, if not 90% of the DPRK foreign trade. If we were able to cut off all the oil supply, of course we would lose completely all the diplomatic leverage. But at the same time, it's what the United States wants to see.
Yep.
They would see this as the most effective, most lethal sanctions against the DPRK, because under this extreme circumstance, the DPRK would be completely isolated, and therefore their financial means to support more of the missile and nuclear tests would be strained.
Well, actually, you are touching a very complicated issue facing China for a long time, not only now. Basically, I would say oil supply, unlike the other exchanges between the North Korea and China, oil supply is a really fundamental item to North Korea. And oil and its related products are dual-use goods. It either go to civilian uses or military uses, but mainly
Don't forget the DPRK has always upheld the principle of military first. So it's almost certain that all of our oil supply would go to the military.
Well,
and the maneuvers of the military would be guaranteed under this principle of Pyongyang.
Yes, I do agree with your point. But however, with their expansion of economic activities in recent years, the oil supply flow more and more to the civilian uses. So basically, it's a really complicated question to China. Say, if we cut off completely the oil supply, the consequences will be quite mixed. Yes, you're right. The military activities will be sharply shrink. However, the civilian activities like economic activities and the market will be sharp. And that will produce some unpredictable humanitarian problems, even not humanitarian crisis.
Your answer takes me back to the years of Kofi Annan, when the American initiative, or an initiative coming from one of the parties, suggested the oil for food supply, oil for food humanitarian assistance for the Saddam Hussein regime. And Kofi Annan did have a hard time to persuade the American media, well, he's not involved in the corruption scandal. What do you think of, say, the humanitarian crisis that's more likely to be generated as a result of China's embargo? I mean, a thorough and complete suspension of oil supply to our neighboring country of the DPRK.
Well, I think that would be the first test of whether you would have a humanitarian crisis.
I assume you understand my understatement in the question.
Yes.
We don't want to see civilian casualties.
Right. Well, the difference between oil and medicine, the difference between oil and food is significant. This would be a way to inflict a lot of pain on the government of North Korea with modest pain on average people. If you started that with medicine, if you started that with food products, that would unquestionably lead to consequences such as famine and dislocation.
My last question goes to Prof. Hello.
Hello?
As part of the package
Yes.
of President Trump to punish the DPRK over the ignition or detonation of the latest nuclear bomb, he said that the United States is ready to provide its two allies in Northeast Asia with more sophisticated weapons. What does that mean for Japan? Do you actually need such weaponry, or do you think this is more of a show, a political theater?
In case of the United States policies, there is one characteristic that someone says very extreme opinion, strong, sharp opinion. The other person then, after that, says very soft, very, you see, calm, down, you see, opinions. And so which way do you want? They want to ask. So in case of the North Korea, the President Trump says something, then the secretaries say something different. But in case of Japan, Mr. Abe, his supporting rate is getting down and down. So he is puzzled. He asked Mr. Putin recently that Putin can agree with Japan because of the economic reasons, but Putin, you see, rejected. Like this, Mr. Abe is put into difficulty. What he does is to get the support of the people by making all the situations very extremely tensioned. So this is the Abe is doing. So we must understand that the tension or physical strength or attacks cannot, you see, solve anything. So persuasion and dialogues and negotiations, theoretical ones, from the China, Russia, and the United States.
Thank you so much,
so I
Professor
hope
Watanabe.
Yeah.
President Putin of Russia says the DPRK will not give up its nuclear ambition and capability, partly because it's the umbrella for the family dynasty. I wonder if that's true. But anyway, the United States made it very clear that once the nuclear warhead, which is militarized, could be mounted on the missile delivery, then that'll be the day for military intervention. We're going to see what's going to happen next. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.